This is Retail Voices, the podcast where leaders from the world of retail and outside of retail talk straight about what really works. Insight, innovation, and the human side of the industry all in one place. Hosted by Mark Lack. That's me. Let's dive in. Hi, Ricky, and welcome to Retail Voices.
Hi, Mark. Super excited to be here. Thanks for inviting.
No, it's really good to have you here. So in this episode, we're going to be diving into one of the most complex and possibly most transformative areas of retail, which is global sourcing. And today we're joined by Ricky Ho, the founder of SourceReady, a company using AI to revolutionize how brands discover, qualify, and manage suppliers worldwide. We'll be talking about how data, AI, and new thinking are changing the way retailers build their supply chains, faster, smarter, and more transparent than ever before. So, Ricky, let's start with the very beginning. Can you tell us the story of SourceReady, what gap in the global sourcing landscape you saw, and why you decided to build a solution for it?
I think it came from a frustration that some of the world's best suppliers are actually not visible online. So if you think about some of the world's best factories, they have very little information online, and the information that is online, it's actually very hard to discern what's credible and what's not. So Alibaba, for example, is kind of like the default website that people go to whenever they have to look for a factory. But obviously, anyone that's ever used Alibaba can tell you, first of all, the user experience is not the best. Two, it's heavily concentrated in China. So if you wanted to find suppliers outside of China, it's actually quite difficult. And number three, I would say if you're not a professional procurement or trained supply chain professional, it's actually very hard to tell, BS from, reality. So let's say you wanted to make this polo shirt, and if you go on, these directories like Alibaba and you search polo shirt, you're going to get hundreds of factories that to a unprofessional eye look all the same. Right? They all say they can do polo shirts.
Yes.
But how do you know out of the 100 factories, which one actually fits your criteria? And if you think about the business model of Alibaba and these other directories, they actually fundamentally are an advertising website for factories. So basically suppliers pay a lot of money for visibility on Alibaba. As a buyer, the problem with that is when you search for something, you're going to get a bunch of ads. So the top 10 factories, when you see in that list, are just going to be the suppliers that pay the most money. And many of which are actually trading companies disguised as manufacturers, right? So this is why oftentimes people get ripped off, right? Like this t-shirt probably is only worth, $5, $6, but some people will quote, $14, $15, 2, 3x the actual cost, right? Unless you're, super well trained, a lot of times for new people, entering kind of the sourcing game, this could be a huge, challenge. So I think, the reason why we wanted to start SourceReady is we wanted to create a buyer-centric platform that, helps the retailer and buyer and not necessarily just shows visibility for the factories that pay the most money. So that's kind of the main reason. And I think the second part is we do believe that supply chains are in the long run going to become more diversified. China obviously is still very powerful in manufacturing, but we believe there's going to be a fundamental shift away from China. There's multiple reasons for that. Number one, geopolitically, tariffs, all that. People don't want to source everything out of China. People are looking for factories in Mexico, domestically in the US, Vietnam, Cambodia, Indonesia. But if you ask anyone that has ever tried sourcing out of China, I can tell you that the first barrier is actually how do I even find a factory in Mexico or in Cambodia, right? Like most of these suppliers in these kind of developing countries, they don't even have any information online.
Yeah, they don't have a website even.
They don't have a website, exactly. And Alibaba at least has a website. So I was talking to a friend of mine who's started his own brand, and he was telling me it's ironically it's much easier for him to find a factory overseas in China than the US, because even in the US we don't even have, established platforms like Alibaba where manufacturers register themselves.
There's no
So
directory
like
services for it.
exactly. And this is why like people still go to trade shows. Like there's a lot of these different trade shows where suppliers attend and then buyers go. So I think the fundamental goal is actually to aggregate the world's supplier data. And the way we do this is we actually aggregate data from hundreds of different data sources, including customs data, trade show data, certification data from all these different offline sources. So yeah,
How
and,
did
and
I
I
mean
think
that?
like
That was the bit that amazed me. I mean, you gather data from customs filings, trade
yep,
shows, verified
yep,
sources, and that's a pretty powerful pipeline.
yes,
And it's obviously what makes you different from traditional sourcing platforms
yep.
that retailers have used for years. How did you manage to get all of that information?
I think that's actually so the first 6 months of the founding of the company, a lot of it was actually spent on data acquisition.
Mm,
Because, for example, like a lot of this data is actually not generally publicly available. What I mean by that is, as a regular consumer, you
mm,
can't just go to U.S. Customs to say, "Give me your data." Right? This data is legally available to the public, but it is not available in the sense that there's a website on U.S. Customs where you can get shipment data. So
yes.
we have to go through hoops and these different processes to acquire the data. And U.S. Customs is only one of the 65 countries in which we have customs data for. So we have data from Vietnam Customs, Indonesia
Wow.
Customs,
Right.
Mexico Customs, and every country has a different legal and kind of bureaucratic process in which you have to go through to get the data. And obviously,
And
there's a
and
cost. It's not
and
free.
in a different data set as well. So I'm sure there's a lot of
Exactly.
sorting once you get the data to have it in some kind
Exactly.
of readable format for the
So
sourcing
this is
managers.
why we need a data pipeline. A huge part of what we do is actually cleaning data.
Mm,
So even today, let's say I were to dump you, the raw customs data, it would be useless for 99.999% of users because the data is too raw. So literally, the data that we have is shipment data. It's bill of lading data, right? It's
mm.
like customs filings data. So I'll give you an example. In 2024 alone, just for U.S. customs data, there's over close to 100 million records of
Wow.
records. That's
Wow.
way too much data, right? Because at that granularity, what are you going to use that for? Um, so what people actually want is the insights derived from that data. And this is where kind of the big data and AI kind of piece comes in, where it's like, how can we take in all this data and actually make it a useful experience for the regular non-technical retailer and buyer, right? For me, all I want to search is find me a supplier in North America that can make this specific product at a competitive price with the certification,
Mm.
and I want the supplier to have worked with this type of customer, right? And our
Okay.
and
Yeah.
our AI is going to use customs data as one of the sources to verify that supplier. But we're not just using customs data because customs data is only part of the data enrichment process. We also get, for example, contact information. Let's say you actually want to reach
Mm.
out to the supplier. Customs data does not have contact information. So even if I were to give you that, how are you going to actually reach out to the supplier? So we have to then either get the contact information if the supplier, fingers crossed, has their own website where they put their email or phone number or
Mm.
contact. We will scrape and crawl that. But many suppliers, as I mentioned, don't have public facing
Yeah.
websites with contact info. So the other thing we do is why do we buy data from trade shows? Because we buy exhibitor lists. So
Yeah.
let's say a supplier, attended some trade show and exhibited 2 years ago. We buy the contact info from these trade shows so that we can match and say, oh, look, this supplier that we have in our customs filing attended this trade show 2 years ago, and here's their phone number and email. And then we show you in the platform. So you could think of it as like aggregating all these offline sources and making kind of a unified profile for the retailer to look through.
I mean that makes it fantastic for not only the sourcing manager, but it's also a good resource for the suppliers themselves.
Yes.
And when I look at it from a retail perspective, because I am a retailer at heart, um, what has been the biggest friction point in supplier discovery and then onboarding? So how does AI help remove or reduce that friction?
Well, I think there's multiple steps to discovery. One is, search. So that's
Hmm.
actually finding the suppliers that match your criteria. The second is evaluation.
Hmm.
So let's say, out of, 10,000 suppliers, you obviously aren't going to work with all 10,000. So you have to kind of score each vendor against your requirements to see which one best fits your criteria.
Hmm.
And this is where AI really comes into play, where in this kind of work, AI is actually much better at than humans. So,
Because we're
um,
biased, yeah.
one is bias, and I think the other is humans are not good at ingesting huge volumes of data, and
Yes,
humans have horrible memory. If I
yes.
give you a list of 200 suppliers, it's going to take you probably hundreds of hours to evaluate all 200, even if
Yep.
the requirements are not that complicated. So, I'll give an example. Let's say I say, I want to look for a supplier in a low tariff country to the US that, for example, has been around for more than 10 years, has a low MOQ, can make this specific category and has a specific certification. Let's say I'm in the food industry, so I need them to have FDA certification. So you can imagine let's say you did a search and you got a list of 200 suppliers. For each of the 200, you have to do a checklist and say, okay, do they match this criteria? Do they match this? Do they match this? Um, and it's just not feasible
Mm.
for a human to look at thousands of It's not. It's just not worth their time, right?
Yes,
But if
yep.
you think about AI, what AI is good at is I can just dump, a couple of thousand supplier profiles to AI and say, okay, here are the 5 criteria I have. Here is this clean, enriched data of each supplier. Tell me how many criteria each supplier matches, and then score the suppliers from top to bottom on which supplier out of the thousands match this. And then for AI, it takes like 30 seconds.
Yes,
Um,
yeah.
so
Yep.
I would say like this is where AI and humans really work in complementary because
Mm.
I think what humans are good at is actually the final decision making process. Right?
Yes.
AI is just going to give you a recommendation and it's going to give you kind of a more objective truth. But
Yep.
sourcing is not just about the objectivity data. There's a lot of relationship building, there's negotiating, there's a lot of understanding the pros and cons of each supplier in a country. And I think the final decision, obviously, is going to be made by the human.
Still
But
with
I
the
think,
human.
I think what AI is going to allow, I think it's especially going to help medium-sized companies or even smaller companies, because
Yes.
for large companies, they have the ability to hire huge teams in Hong Kong or in Asia to handle the grunt work,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
But you can imagine if I'm a small to medium sized importer or retailer in the Midwest, I'm not going to have the budget to hire, 30, 40 people for sourcing, right? Um,
Exactly.
so typically you have one person or two people doing a lot of this work, and they oftentimes will basically outsource this work to like some imports, to like some trading company in the Philippines or something, whose incentives are not necessarily aligned with your company's.
Exactly. Yep.
So I
Exactly.
think I think what AI is going to help is help these medium-sized companies without the resources of hiring huge teams to help offload and automate a lot of this kind of repetitive manual work, and
Yes.
have kind of humans focus on the more high value aspects of
Absolutely.
supply chain and sourcing.
Absolutely. And it's also about standardization. I mean, we did an exercise in a previous company where we had a lot of problems in the descriptions of the products.
Yep.
There was no standardized nomenclature set up. So basically, I gave the standard nomenclature, I gave the AI the barcode and the current product description and the parameters they needed to work
Yep.
in. And I just did it for one small subcategory. And like I say,
Yep.
within 10 seconds, it actually created a proper description list that I could then put into
Yep.
Excel and upload it straight into the file. So it
Yep.
didn't waste my time. And this was as part of a small to medium enterprise. So I think this it will help the small and medium businesses
Yep.
speed up their operation rather than
Yep.
spending time on the grunt work, which you
Yep.
don't want to do.
Yep.
And I mean, you said it earlier, many brands are now looking at diversifying their supply base beyond
Yes.
China, into markets like Vietnam, India,
Yep.
Mexico, Indonesia.
Yep.
So, there are risk elements, and one of them you specifically raised, which was tariffs.
Yep.
And then we've got other risk elements such as compliance.
Yep.
Um, and also now the other one we have to think about, because we've got this battle between tariffs and then rare earth materials.
Yep. Yep.
You've got material shortages as well. So what should retailers be thinking about now because of all of those risks that are coming in?
Well, I think one of the things is obviously it's a balancing game. So I
Mm,
would not go to the extreme and say, okay, I'm going to source everything outside of China. I
mm,
think I think China still has many of its advantages. Obviously, it's been building up its supply chain for 20 years. So I would say I would take it as a multi-step approach. For many of the large retailers that we work with, what we see is they set a long-term goal, like let's say reduce China reliance in the next 5 years and reduce dependency from let's say 50% to 30%, right? So you set a
mm.
goal for yourself. Over the next 5 years, I'm going to build a more redundant supply chain. It's not to say completely replace and you know kick out China. It's more of saying for every supplier I have in China, I'm going to find a backup somewhere else.
Yeah.
And then over time, you shift production from China to Vietnam to Cambodia. What I see a lot of kind of retailers and brands make mistake is they naively think, okay, I'm gonna like cut out my supplier that I've been working with for 4 years. I'm gonna like find some random supplier I've never worked with in India, and then they get scammed, and they're like, oh,
Yes.
I'm gonna this China diversification doesn't work. Okay, let's just keep working with our China one. I think that's the wrong approach. Like you don't want to take extreme measures. What I would say is, start small. First, send some of your smaller orders, test orders to these new countries, regions, maybe some of the simpler stuff, right? Like let's say you have
Yes.
multiple SKUs, send some of the more simple stuff to just test to see the reliability of these suppliers. And over time, once the supplier has proven, the reliability and their competitiveness, start increasing their kind of volume and shifting. So I think that's the first step. The second step is uh, look at end-to-end costs and not just only the production cost.
Yes.
So I think what people oftentimes make the mistake is they look at only like the FOB or like the factory quote, but in reality, there's a lot of costs that go into the end-to-end supply chain. So number one, freight, shipping,
Yes. Yep.
and time is also a cost. Just for people to right, people, it's not just the financial cost. The second is I would say quality is a soft cost that you have to think about, reliability, because if you have high return rates, not only is that going to affect your cost, it's also going to affect your reputation, which is going to actually be more expensive to buy back.
Yes.
And then number three, there's operational and overhead cost on your actual like management side. So one of the reasons why people still like rely on China to a large extent is Chinese suppliers are kind of this full package service. So
Yep.
many of these suppliers in China will do everything for you. They'll handle packaging for you. They'll do, your freight forwarding. They'll just like basically you send them a photo of something, you're like, make this for me. And to be honest, many of the suppliers can and are quite well at English and can just do
Yep.
everything.
Yep.
If you were to go to, let's say, like Cambodia or Vietnam, many of the suppliers can't even speak English well. There's a lot of like communication barrier. You have to explain to them. They don't understand things as well. And unless you have like a really good team that can like do all this follow up and management, a lot of
Yes.
times you end up increasing your operational costs because now you have to hire
Yes.
someone
Yeah. To
or
do that
or like outsource
communication.
this. Exactly.
Yeah.
So I would say you have to consider all of these costs and not just like even if like a supplier is more expensive, but let's say
Yeah.
they're more established. They have an office in the US or they have like an English speaking person and they've been in business for longer and are more reliable. Even if their final cost is 10% more expensive, I mean their production quote is 10% more. Once you add up all the other invisible costs, they could end up being actually cheaper in the end.
Yes.
Um, so I would say these are all things to check for. And obviously, it also depends on what industry you're in. I would say in more
And
heavily
which products? I mean, one of the
which
things
products.
that I've noticed, specifically in China, when making clothing, yeah, producing clothing items, they are already geared up for what a triple XL means for an American compared to what a triple XL means for a Chinese person. Whereas actually going to Indonesia to make a triple XL for an American company, you would have to spend a lot of time explaining to them it's not the same as a triple
Yes.
XL in Indonesia.
Yes. Yep.
And this sort of thing, I mean, we talk about speed and cost that are constant pressures in retail. These are
Yep.
things that we're always looking at. And when we look at time and cost savings,
Yep.
are you seeing brands actually getting those cost savings by using SourceReady compared to the more manual or traditional sourcing processes?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple cost savings that come. One is obviously reducing your overhead from having to hire a lot of people to do this operational
Mm,
work. The second is being able to save costs by helping you find sources that you otherwise would not be able to find. And in the end up you saving a lot of production and sourcing costs. So I think for both, there's a huge amount of value that we can help you with because these are both tasks in which for many organizations, it's not like we're replacing some existing system that does this already. Like
mm,
we're already working with a lot of Fortune 500 retailers, and even at
mm.
these companies, whenever they see a demo of our tool, they're like, "Oh my God, like this is incredible! Like we don't even have this data."
Life
Um,
changing.
yeah, it's life changing. I'm saying this humbly. I'm not saying we're the only company in this space, but I do think AI is going to have the biggest impact in this area of supply chain. And
Yes.
and the reason I believe this is because I would say actually if you look downstream in supply chain, if you look at things like managing purchase orders and kind of the more um, process related kind of processes, I actually think AI is less helpful there
Yes.
because those are all just very kind of SOP driven, like, do A, then B, then C. There's not much things that AI can help with. And it's kind of like a high value, low frequency kind of task. Whereas supplier discovery, negotiation, and kind of this, tariff calculation and all that is actually, even at very big companies, largely manual today. It's not like they have
Yes.
an ERP or a system that does it. It's like on Excel sheets. Um,
Or it's
and I would,
some supplier knocking the door, um,
yes,
or it's going to the trade show, or it's actually
exactly.
just somebody sending you a leaflet through or an email that comes through
Exactly.
randomly.
And a
So
lot of it is also relationship driven. So
yes.
people also ask around and they're like, because they'll be like, hey, does anyone know a supplier in Vietnam that does this, right? You ask around for other peers in the industry or other
Yeah.
colleagues. And I would say actually this is the most common source of how big companies source. So like
Yes.
if you think about a retailer like Ralph Lauren or Calvin Klein, because we also work with many of those brands, and you talk to those sourcing people, all of these supply chain people have been in the business for like 25, 30 years, right? And let's say the Ralph Lauren guy, he used to work at H&M, hypothetically.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, they probably know a lot of good suppliers from their days at H&M. And now they jump ship to Ralph Lauren. And now they need to find a new supplier. Oh, okay, well, the first thing to think about is, okay, I have this vendor I worked with, 8 years ago from H&M that I think is quite good. And they'll reach out to their H&M supplier. So a lot of it is also very much relationship driven, right?
100%. I mean,
And
we
to be
have
honest,
this.
it's yeah,
We have this as well in the grocery retail industry. In fact, we find it quite incestuous because of the amount of people that basically rotate
yep,
around similar
yep,
retailers.
yep.
And every 2 or 3 years, you sort of lose somebody and then you meet up with them again, um, which can be quite funny, but can be quite awkward sometimes.
Yeah,
Um, so I think one of the most interesting things I found out about SourceReady is the product ideation,
yeah,
generating photorealistic renders
yep,
and early
yep,
bills of materials.
yep.
I've never heard of a company doing this before. So to me, that's pretty amazing. Can you explain a
Yep.
bit more about how you manage that with your clients?
Well, I think, as I mentioned, there are things that AI is very good at, and there are things that humans are good at. I think AI is very good at taking a concept and building an MVP, a minimum
Mm,
viable concept, right? What AI is not good at, I think, at least today, it's still not good enough to create a complete tech pack or a complete spec.
mm,
Um, that So for example, let's take a t-shirt or like a polo shirt as an example. Let's say I found let's say I want to make a Ralph Lauren style t-shirt, but I want to change the material from, the typical cotton to a more premium wool material, hypothetically. Now, the traditional process would be like you get a designer, and you like redesign that whole thing. But in reality, what you can do now is have AI spin up a mock-up and tell AI like, here, I have a Ralph Lauren polo shirt. I want to follow this style generally, but swap the Ralph Lauren logo for my company logo and then change the material from cotton to wool. Now, AI is very good at actually spinning up a really photorealistic rendering of that. And it's not going to be so good to the point where it could give you a measurement chart where
Yeah, it's not a
it tells
production
you that,
model. Yeah.
yeah, it's not a production model.
Mm,
It's a prototype.
mm.
But the good thing about, obviously sourcing out of, working with good suppliers is that many suppliers will make the production kind of spec for you. So if you just send a factory a good description of what you want, a lot of suppliers actually can do the latter half of the thing. So this is why a lot of small e-commerce businesses now or retailers aren't even hiring professional product designers.
Yeah. Yeah.
They'll have internally people called merchandisers or merchants, where their job is more or less identifying the market trend and understanding what type of product or like doing the prototyping. And then the rest of this more granular design work, just have the factory do. Because a lot of the factories are better at design than you because they're closer to the real physical product.
Exactly.
I think that is a part where AI can help with, right? It's like fast prototyping,
Yeah.
quickly, and honestly, in retail, everyone copies each other, or I don't want to say copy, but takes inspiration from other people, right?
That's a much better
Um,
way of putting it. Yeah.
yeah, and I think this take inspiration concept is more or less, okay, I like what my competitor or what this other brand is doing, but I'm going to add my own take to it because my consumer base is different, right? Maybe Ralph Lauren's pricing is too expensive for my consumer base. Let's make the materials slightly worse, but let's keep the style, right? Now, then you can have AI quickly spin up a new rendering with slightly cheaper material but a similar design. So I think these are all things where AI is going to be very good at and help and be very productive in allowing the product development process to be a lot more agile.
And I think it's about speed as well, and just the fact
Yes.
that it can go off in multiple tangents. I mean, we
Yes.
we created a new coffee beverage for the summer period, which was based on an affogato. So it was actually a an ice cream sandwich with an espresso poured over it in an edible cup. And that idea actually came out of AI because we were looking for something different. We were looking for something sustainable that could be given. And it ended up being called the Sandwichino, which is a really good product and worked really well. I mean, one of the things that people do talk a lot about AI, and AI is using information that's already out there in terms of its, the large language models that it's using. A lot of questions then arise about things like transparency and ethics. So, how do you balance automation with the human element of trust and quality in the supplier relationships?
There are certain things that you can vet through data. And I think
Mm,
anything that you can objectively vet, you should let AI do. So
mm,
example is certifications, right? Make sure they have, things like BSCI, which is like social compliance, make sure they don't have like child laborers.
yeah,
Um, Make sure they have certain sustainability initiatives. For example, like you can have if you're in the fashion industry, and you're making cotton products, making sure they're using sustainable or recycled cotton, and there's like certifications that you can filter for. So you can tell AI, I want to find suppliers with these specific types of certifications, and AI can cross check all of that at scale. So,
yes,
but just because a supplier has a certification doesn't automatically mean okay, this supplier is perfect in the sustainability and compliance. It just means that they passed the initial bar. The human part, it comes later, where there's still a relationship building, and oftentimes you still need to, in the long run, visit the factory and see in person this more physical aspect. But I think what AI is good at is taking 2,000 candidates and narrowing that to 50. And then
Mm.
out of the 50, going to the last 3, I think it's going to be a mix of AI plus human. And there's always going to be a human proportion to this. The problem before was that a lot of it is actually very luck driven. Without AI, let's say the 2,000 initial pool, you could actually waste time talking to a lot of suppliers that don't even pass that initial bar. Like, why waste time talking to a supplier that, first of all, maybe they're not even a manufacturer. Like, let's say you want to look for an end manufacturer, but you've been talking to a trading company the whole time, or like a sourcing agent. That is just like, you should not even be wasting. You should vet them before that and making sure that they're actually what they say they are. Or let's say you want to find a supplier that is FDA certified because you're in the food industry or you're in the pharmaceutical industry, right? Like, you want to make sure are they actually FDA certified? If they're not, all these other things won't matter. So I think you could think of it as a funnel, right? Like, have
Yeah.
AI do this initial vetting, kind of thing like a pre-screening, and then the second step is we automate the outreach too. So our system actually integrates with your email, and we can like bulk send kind of these questionnaires to suppliers.
Okay.
So during the second phase, what is actually very time consuming traditionally is actually this Q&A back and forth that people will do with suppliers. Like, you ask each supplier, hey, do you have this certification? Hey, can you do this? Do you have this? And then there's like this whole back and forth process with each. AI is also gonna really help with that portion, right? Because this is not like really hard work. It's just a lot of manual,
Yeah.
follow up and emails. And then the last part is the evaluation. I would say this is going to be uniquely human.
Yeah.
I don't foresee AI ever really in the short run replacing this because it's very nuanced in understanding,
It is.
which one. Yeah. So I
And
think.
I think this is also where, I mean, I was speaking to somebody recently
Mm,
about a similar subject in terms of AI. And as you can see, I'm a bit older than you are, a bit grayer. And, there's still an element of my experience counts for something. I've been in the industry now for 40 years. I've built up all of these massive relationships with different suppliers, retailers, manufacturers, whoever they may be.
yep.
How do we remove that fear? Because if you're going to take away my
Yep.
job, essentially, or my knowledge base, um, how do we remove that fear so that the individual, I think you just said it, it's about getting it down to those 3, and that's where the human takes over, using their knowledge and experience built up over a number of years to then make the final decision. Yeah.
I think it's moving up the value chain is what I
Mm.
would say. Is you want to be an expert at the very nuanced aspects and not be an Excel master. I
Yeah.
would say if your competency is I'm very good at searching on Alibaba and crunching Excel numbers. To be honest, I think objectively AI is going to outperform you
Yes.
because you're never going to outperform AI in terms of the scale in which the AI can operate at. However, I think the ability to, let's say after this initial search and let's say the AI writes a report, the ability to actually very deeply analyze the results and understand, okay, yes, the supplier is cheaper, but from our experience, Vietnam, even though it's cheaper, maybe right now we're not ready yet because their MOQ is higher, so we should maybe still do 30%, I mean 70% in China first, and then once our revenue grows to this scale and we have a larger order set, then we can shift maybe only this part of our product to this supplier as a test order. And then
Mm.
so developing the actual strategy is something where I think AI is not gonna be very good at. It's too nuanced and it's too business specific. Like, AI is not gonna have the full context of your entire business.
Yeah.
So AI cannot provide a really good recommendation because it's too nuanced. Um, and I don't think, even if it can, I don't think humans want to outsource this work to AI because
No.
AI cannot take the fall on bad decisions. Like like as a human, if you choose the wrong supplier, ultimately you have someone to like relatively, I don't want to say blame, but like you have
Yes.
someone that takes responsibility.
Someone accountable. Yeah.
Yeah, if you say, okay, AI is going to do the entire process and select the supplier. Let's say AI chose the wrong supplier. What are you going to do? You're going to fire the AI? Like, I mean, there. I
Yes.
think
Well, I
I
mean
think you
that
can take.
that came out in a study where I think one of the bigger players decided to let a an AI run a store. Um, and they just basically went wild with different types of products and punched and bolts. I think they were ordering
Yeah,
in a grocery store. Um, and ultimately, the business was giving discounts because it wasn't selling because it had ordered the wrong thing that it thought it should have. And basically, the
yeah,
business just went bankrupt within a few months because it didn't have the nuances of everything else that was coming in.
yes,
And I think this is
yes.
important for sourcing managers, sourcing directors, especially when you're looking from a global perspective. Is that this is about actually an even better assistant than the one you've got at the
Yep,
moment.
yep.
Because even your assistant, and if you have 20 assistants can't work at the same scale and speed that the AI from SourceReady could work at.
Well, you can think of. I think this is what kind of the funny thing about AI. It's like it's superhuman in certain types of tasks,
Yeah.
but it's also incredibly stupid in other types of things.
Oh yes.
So this is where I think nuance. That's why I say nuance is important. Where
Yes.
sometimes you're like, oh my God, like this is incredible. Like AI is definitely going to outperform my entire team. And then sometimes the thing that conclusions are like makes you question if AI is really here to replace, jobs because it's just like so stupid.
Oh
So
no.
this is why I think at least in the near 5 years, I don't see a future where AI is going to automate the high value aspects of at least sourcing and supply chain. I think the human is always going to be in control. However, I think the procurement and sourcing people that are not going to adopt AI are going to be in danger because I think every industry, every company in the world is looking to adopt AI, and I think the people that know how to use AI is going to outperform the ones that don't. I think that's my opinion. I think
100%.
AI
Yeah.
is going to be an advantage for the people that know how to use it.
100%. I mean, this is, I mean, you look at many smaller or growing retail brands, they struggle anyway with global sourcing because they just don't have the number of people to be able to do it. So, what are the most
Yep.
common mistakes that you see? And what advice would you give to new or emerging retailers trying to scale responsibly?
Um, I think there's a lot of different advice. I would say number one, as I mentioned, in the long run, diversify,
Hmm.
build resilience in your supply chain. In the short run, make sure you have a plan to do it in a way that doesn't ruin your supply chain and business, and manage risk. So do things in uh like do it in a transition that makes sense.
Hmm.
So move only parts of your production to new regions when you're unsure if that region actually is the right fit. Um, and then my second advice would be look at cost as an end-to-end cost and
Hmm.
also consider invisible costs that oftentimes are hard to calculate by the end production cost. So you want to look at things holistically. Consider tariffs, consider quality, consider operational overhead on and shipping time and all these
Shipping
different
time. Yeah.
all of these factors when you consider what suppliers to work with. And the third thing I would actually say, especially for small, medium-sized businesses, um, don't kind of be naive and think you can operate the same as a large organization because you don't have the negotiating and levers to do so. So I think a lot of smaller or medium-sized businesses naively think, okay, well, if a large global retailer is sourcing out of this country or this supplier, we should do the same. In reality, that's not the case because you don't have the volumes and the
Yes.
scale, and the teams to do what they do. So, actually, a lot of really good suppliers, that's it's hard for small businesses to work with because their MOQs are just too crazy, right? Like their minimum orders are going to be like 10,000 pieces, whereas for you maybe 10,000 pieces is the total number of products you order for your entire collection,
Yeah.
whereas 10,000 is only their minimum order for one product.
Yeah.
So what I would say is when you're still growing, your supply chain needs to evolve over time. So when you're small, it's unlikely you're going to work with the most established suppliers in the industry, because the suppliers are not going to want to work with you. You're too small. But
Yes.
it doesn't mean you can't start building a relationship. Like, so what I know is that some of these established suppliers, they're also willing to take a bet on new companies and new
Hmm.
brands if they believe you have potential. So you can obviously start reaching out, building relationships, seeing if you can do some test orders with them, but never bet your supply chain on them because you're not important to them. You're too small for them.
Yes.
Even if they do decide to work with you, if there is a scenario you can imagine where they are swamped with orders and your order is next to their biggest customer, they are going to
We
kick you
know
out
which
and
one's
just
going to go first. Yeah.
exactly. So what I would say is it's a cruel world where it's business first, right? So I
Of
think
course. Yeah.
you want to find the supplier that best matches your current capability, and
Hmm.
as you improve, you also want to improve your supply chain. So what I see a lot of businesses, what ends up happening is, let's say they do 2 million a year when they start. 5 years down the road, they're actually a $20 million a year business. Let's say they're doing well, or $30 million business, right? But they're still working with the supplier they worked with when they just started. Now, now it's possible that that initial supplier is good. It's also very likely that that supplier is actually, I would say, not the best option that you can actually look for.
Yes.
And it's just serendipity and luck that you ended up working with that supplier when you actually don't know there's like much better suppliers out there. And maybe
Yeah.
before, 5 years ago, you probably, even if you wanted to, you probably didn't have the ability to work with these other really great suppliers. But now that you are a $30 million business, you should be looking at suppliers that match that $30 million scale. And as you scale to 100 million, 500 million, there are suppliers all the way up the value chain. So I would say, think about supply chain as an overtime improvement and not
Yeah.
as a one-time thing. You should be continuously reevaluating your supply chain based on your business, your scale, your business model, your needs, the different risks that are changing in the industry.
It needs to be part of your strategic intent, because a lot of people leave supply chain as a sort of a few words at the end of strategy. Um, and most of it tends to be about sustainability
Yeah.
and all of that kind of stuff, which people head for at the moment. But actually, supply chain is a massive part of the business when you're selling
Yes.
products and not making them yourself. Um, and talking about evolution of a retailer's or a business's own supply chain, how do you see sourcing platforms evolving over the next 3 to 5 years, especially as retail, e-commerce, and supply chains continue to converge?
I think there's a couple things. I think automation is going to be a key word here,
Mm,
where agility and speed is definitely the thing that all retailers need to adopt, because if you're too slow and unable to adopt, your products are not going to sell well because the consumer market is changing very quickly.
yes.
And the reason why you see convergence is because things need to happen faster. Every process is interlinked with each other. Consumer trend changes affects product development, which affects supplier sourcing, which affects your final like purchasing, and affects your fulfillment, and then affects the final selling through. So this entire cycle is going to be more and more automated, because through automation you can actually have the feedback loop much faster.
Mm,
Um, the second thing I would say, that's the trend that we're seeing is, uh, I don't necessarily see people getting fired necessarily, especially in high value aspects, but I do see companies maybe not largely increasing headcount and actually moving a lot of their labor costs to AI costs,
mm,
where traditionally they might think, okay, we got to hire a bunch of entry level people to do this kind of more manual work. Or actually, many US based companies don't even hire people in the US, anyways. They'll outsource this work to like a team in China, Philippines, India to do this like manual sourcing work.
yep.
Where now, instead of doing that, they can just, use AI agents for this automation work. And then the third thing, I think, from a technology perspective, I think platforms are going to shift away from just being pure platforms serving information as a commodity to becoming more of a personalized agentic service. What I
Yes.
mean by that is every retailer is going to have unique, different needs. The problem with directories like Alibaba and these platforms is that they're generic. So imagine if you're Walmart, and then if you Walmart's sourcing requirements is very different than a brand just starting out, like a Shopify brand.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
let's say when I go to Alibaba and I search polo shirt, if I am Walmart and searching for a polo shirt, the supplier list I should see should be very, very different than a business just starting, right?
Yes. Very different.
Today, these platforms don't differentiate that. They don't know who the end user, who the buyer is. And for that reason, I would almost have 99.99% confidence most Walmart buyers are not using Alibaba
I
because
bet.
it's
Yeah. Yeah.
um I think in the long run, what platforms are going to need to do is these AI agents are going to need to understand the nuances of each of their kind of users. So every user searching through the platform is going to get a different search result because they're in a different stage in their supply chain, right? Like a $20 a year business is going to have very different supplier requirements than a $1 million a year business. It can be very different than a $10 billion a year business. So I think that level of personalization is going to be added into all these platforms for that to be truly useful.
Fantastic. So if I was coming to you now, I'm a retailer. Um, what three practical actions or questions should I be asking you to try and stay ahead of the game right now in procurement?
I think you mean what questions to
What
ask?
questions should I be asking you? So let's say we're having a meeting and you're talking
Yeah.
about SourceReady. What should
Yep.
I be asking you? I've got nothing at the moment. I'm using ChatGPT,
Yep. Yep. Yep.
Um, what sort of actions or questions should I be asking you?
I think the first question you should ask are what's the data that SourceReady or these tools, where do you source the data from?
Mm,
And what kind of how can I use this data in my day-to-day kind of supply chain process? And the second part is understanding what aspects of your current sourcing can be automated.
mm,
I would not go to extremes and say, okay, now that I have AI, I'm gonna like fire half the team. Like, I think it's important to look at AI as an enabler, not as a replacement.
mhm.
Um, don't I think the problem with AI adoption is that people are too extreme. Like they are either extremely overly optimistic on AI's potential and they get burned and they're like, oh my God, AI is so stupid, or they're overly pessimistic where
Yeah.
they're like, AI can't do anything. So I think that the right answer sits somewhere in between that AI is competent in certain tasks and not yet competent in other tasks.
Mm,
So I think the key question to ask is what type of work is AI actually very good at, and how can it complement my existing workforce? Um, and then the third thing I think a really great question to ask is how can I get people to really be on board on this and
yeah.
get people excited? Because I think a lot of the adoption problem that we see is that the management team understand that AI is important, but when you actually start pushing AI to the actual end users at these companies, you get a lot of resistance.
Yes.
And I can understand that. There's a lot of resistance. Number one, people are resistant to change. They don't want to try new things. Two, I think, to be honest, there is a fear in everyone. They're like, okay, well, if we use this, is it going to replace my job? Stuff
This
like
is my
that.
job. Yep.
So I think there's going to be pushback. Now, how do we reduce this pushback? Number one, I think as management, you need to make it clear that AI is not coming for your job, or at least it is not coming for your job in the sense that it might come for your job if you're not willing to adopt it, because that means you're not willing to, use the best technology. But it's not going to replace in the sense where AI is going to completely replace your function. I don't think it can do that. So I think it's giving people the safety they need to understand, okay,
Mm,
this is a tool that can actually save my time. And then the second thing is I would say from a training and from like a user perspective, start with tasks in which there are clear goals, and not lofty things. I think a lot of times when people use AI, understanding the right prompt and understanding what to give AI is actually very important. The I oftentimes see scenarios where AI fails where you're just too general in what you're asking. So the AI kind of goes off itself and makes a lot of
Yes.
assumptions.
You don't
And
give
then
it
with
context.
it doesn't have your context because you didn't
Yes.
tell it, right? You
Yeah,
you
you
gave it
didn't
like
tell it. Yeah.
you gave it like 4 words. Find me suppliers for t-shirts. And then and because it doesn't know what your requirements, what certifications you want, and any of that, it's just gonna find any supplier with t-shirts. And then you see the result and in your mind, you're like, okay, these suppliers don't
Yes.
match what I have in my mind. And then you're
But
like,
but
oh, AI is bad.
but again, that's what Google is for. Yeah, that's what we used to use Google for. Give me
Yep.
suppliers in this area for t-shirts, and it would give you
Yep.
that. But
Yep.
you can't add context to Google. We didn't used to be
Exactly.
able to add it. Whereas
Exactly.
with AI, you can add a lot more context and give it some thoughts about who it needs to be and what it's looking for.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. As part of Retail 101 Online, I always try to break things down into 3 simple things. So, what 3 simple things would you like for the listeners to take away from our session today?
So number one, supply chain is a long-term investment. This is a continuous thing that you should always be optimizing. Number two, AI is not coming to replace jobs. At least it's not replacing the entire procurement function. It is a enabler for people to become more productive and more useful. It's also going to allow people to move up the value chain and focus on more high value parts. And number three is, I think, diversify and build resilience in your supply chain, but do it in a way that makes sense for your business and reduce the risk of that diversification process. And there is going to be pain in that process, but make sure you do it where you're not putting all your eggs in one basket. So I think those are the key takeaway.
Fantastic. That's great. Thanks, Ricky, for joining us today. Everyone, that was Ricky Ho, the founder of SourceReady, giving us a real look into the future of sourcing and how AI is shaping retail's next wave of innovation. It's now time to say goodbye from Ricky, and of course, goodbye from me. We'll be back next month with another Retail Voices episode. Check out retail101online.com for more details on the upcoming guests. And of course, don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell wherever you get your podcast fix. Welcome to the Retail Education Revolution.
Thank you, Mark.
Brilliant. Thank you.